I want to ask you about another element of your teenage years that is potentially very painful. So it goes without saying, say what you're comfortable with, but I'd love you to just sketch in the topic you come to reasonably late in the book, which is experiences of what you would now call abuse or sexual exploitation, but didn't quite know how to understand at the time. Are you comfortable just saying a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, I felt it was very important to have it in Out of the Woods because it was very formative for me. And also it was, I basically had fumbly teenage experiences with a friend at school, which were high risk and strange in lessons. But then there was also this sort of seeking out or putting myself in a position where I was sought out by sort of grim old men in public toilets and things like that. Which, was, for years I used to brush it off and make a joke out of it. I've always had a sort of fairly bracing sense of humour. I used to say I was performing care in the community for the OAPs and things like that. And I still find there's a slight amusingness to that, but it's actually really bleak and sad, trying to justify it in that. And there is it's very icky in gay culture because I think it's one of the things that gay culture doesn't like confronting. It doesn't like looking at in its recent history, the kind of connection between teenage boys and older men. I'm not talking about 18, I'm talking much younger. And it was seen as part of the culture almost. You can see in all the research I've done for both books, it's present throughout 20th century gay history and obviously before. And I think it's a bit taboo to kind of critique it in some ways, but I was very vulnerable and it was exploitative, and those situations brought me a huge amount of shame, self-loathing, but were also very addictive. They were high adrenaline, high reward, highly exciting. They felt subversive because I'd be like, everyone at school, you think I'm a geek, but look what I'm really doing. I've spent a fortune on therapy, talking about this, and it's been very interesting. My therapist is not religious, not a Christian at all or anything, and she says, I wasn't very much of a rebel at home. I wasn't the kind of kid who was going boom 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 or anything like that. And she said this was your rebellion, but you had to keep it secret because you loved your parents and you had the framework of religion that you didn't want to upset. So your rebellion was very secret, which I think is very interesting. But yeah, that was, they were very life-shaping things. There's still the consequences of that, which I've written about in the books. But I think this stuff is a lot more prevalent than is realised. The statistics for unwanted touch, as it's called, are pretty horrific. It's a not insignificant minority of people have experienced that. And I think maybe with Me Too, I think maybe the women talk about it more, but it's still so taboo among men to speak about it. I think I understand why a lot of gay and queer men don't want to talk about it, because there is that association by the right wing and homophobes between paedophilia and homosexuality that is used to justify homophobia. And I can see why there's gay people in queer culture don't really like discussing it. I think it's fair to say that exists in straight culture too. It's just not weaponized in straight culture against the men who are doing that. I think it's probably more widespread. Women have had to suffer that as girls and young teenagers more than men have. But and obviously for a lot of straight men, it would be deeply shameful and something they want to lock down. Some people could brush it off. They go, "Oh, it was part of, I learned a lot. It was my induction into gay life," or whatever. And that's fine if they've been able to deal with it. And it took me a long time to sort of understand how it had been damaging for me. And I do think it's one of these things we really need to have a more honest and open conversation about as a society. Pedo demonization is a popular British pastime. And I think there's a more complicated conversation to have about cycles of abuse and how how those perpetuate and how to break them and how therapy is important and so on.